Throughout man's history, we have learned to hate one another and to fight one another. We can only pity the souls who have fought and died in all of mankind's countless battles. Some battles, however, stand out from the rest. One of these holds the title of the largest and bloodiest battle in human history. A battle involving millions of men. A battle where the life expectancy of a soldier was a day. A battle that would change the course of World War II. In autumn 1942, Europe is destroyed by the rampaging Nazi war machine. Hitler chooses to push into the Soviet Union in hopes of reaching the oil fields of Asia. One last obstacle remains for him to achieve victory: a small village on the Volga River where the fate of the world will be decided. This city is Stalingrad. Though Nazi Germany's initial plan of defeating the Soviet Union in one single battle isn't successful, the Germans still managed to sweep across the Ukraine and make their way into the Caucasus. This sustains Adolf Hitler's confidence and determination as he decides to fight for his prestige by attacking the city of Stalingrad, one of the three major cities in the Soviet front, and more importantly, the city that bears the name of Joseph Stalin. If he succeeds, the damage to Stalin will not just be a moral blow. Volga River, one of the main supply routes for the Soviets on the south, would also be cut off. To ensure his win, Hitler deploys three groups of army to attack from two directions: General Paulus's 6th Army and General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army have the mission of taking the city of Stalingrad and extending downstream to the Volga and Astrakhan. This would give Army Group B, under the control of General Maximilian von Weiss, a solid line covering the eastern area, so they wouldn't have to worry about Stalin's army flanking from that side. Joseph Stalin, on the other hand, had a disastrous summer already, and the last thing he wants to do is end it with a loss of a city that bears his name. Stalin forms a line of defense with 62nd, 63rd, 64th Armies, and the 8th Air Army and the 21st Army, all under the command of Marshal Semyon Timoshenko. He names some parts of the city to be protected regardless of the cost. He refuses to evacuate any of the civilians, stating that the army would be fighting harder, knowing that they were defending residents of the city, and those who disobey Stalin's command would even get executed. The initial German push into the Soviet Union saw millions of well-equipped Wehrmacht soldiers who were well-equipped with bolt-action semi-automatic and MP-40 submachine guns. Because the Germans surprised the Soviets with their rapid advancements into Russia, Stalin was not able to mobilize his men and arm them fast enough to hold the Germans. On August 30th, 1942, the German Air Force Luftwaffe started the attack with the largest bomber raid in history, destroying 80% of the city with incendiary bombs. Following up with the attacks by the three forces of armies in the next couple of days, the Germans are able to push the Soviets back and enter the city by mid-September. At that point, Stalingrad becomes the scene of some of the most fierce and most concentrated fighting of the war. Streets, blocks, and individual buildings are being fought over by many small units of troops and often change hands again and again. The city's remaining buildings were pounded into rubble by the unrelenting close combat. The most critical moment comes on October 14th, when the Soviet defenders have their backs so close to the Volga River that the few remaining supply crossings of the river goes under the German machine gun fire. Despite the success on taking about 90% of the city under control, the Germans, however, are growing dispirited by heavy losses, fatigue, and the approach of winter, which makes them vulnerable to any counterattacks. Up until this point, the Soviet army are under-equipped. Only every second man is able to get their hands on a standard Mosin Nagant Soviet rifle or PPSH-40 submachine gun. But once the Soviets got well equipped and the cold winter came, they were able to hold. The Russians also implemented a new strategy never before used on this scale. Russian snipers were given orders not to focus on foot soldiers, but on officers and high command personnel. This helped destabilize the German organization. The entire world was watching with a close eye. For the time it took Germany to capture all of France, they barely took a city block. In the time it took them to capture Belgium and the Netherlands, they can't even capture a street in Stalingrad. For the first time in the war, the world saw that the Germans were not invincible, and they could be stopped and possibly defeated. It was the Russians that were doing it. The world began to get hope. And what the German army feared the most eventually comes. On November 19th, the Soviet command launches a massive counter-offensive code named Operation Uranus. The attack quickly penetrates through the flanks deeply as they are all defended by unmanned, undersupplied, overstretched, and undermotivated troops. By November 23rd, the two prongs of the attack have linked up in Kalak, about 100 kilometers west of Stalingrad, and the encirclement of the two German armies in Stalingrad is completed. The German high commanders urge Hitler to allow the 6th Army's General Paulus and his forces to break out of the encirclement and rejoin the main German forces west of the city. But Hitler would not even contemplate a retreat from the Volga River and orders Paulus to stand and fight. With winter setting in and food and medical supplies dwindling, Paulus's forces grow weaker and weaker. Hitler declares that the 6th Army would be supplied by the Luftwaffe, and the air convoys can deliver only a fraction of the necessary supplies. The Soviets resumed the offensive on December 16th with the codename Operation Saturn in order to shrink the pocket of encircled Germans and set the stage for the final capitulation of the Germans in Stalingrad. The Volga River is now frozen, and Soviet forces and equipment are sent over the ice at various points within the city. The Nazi Germans, on the other hand, are simply unprepared for the cold. The situation leaves Hitler hopeless, and the only thing he can do is to exhort the trapped German forces to fight to the death. He even promotes Paulus to Field Marshal and reminds Paulus that no German of that rank has ever surrendered. With Soviet armies closing in as part of Operation Ring, the 6th Army are surrounded by 7 Soviet armies. On January 31st, Paulus disobeys Hitler's orders and agrees to give himself up. 22 generals surrender with him, and 2 days after that, the last 91,000 frozen, starving men in the 6th and 4th Army also surrender to the Soviets. The bloodiest battle in history is concluded. With the conclusion of this glorious battle, the world sees the horrors of war. The Germans suffered 400,000 casualties. Combined with the other Axis countries, they lost 850,000 men. The Russians suffered the heavier blow, however, with an estimated 1.2 million casualties and countless civilians lost, with both sides throwing at least 2 million soldiers into the city. However, from that moment on, Germany saw only defeat after defeat, and the Russians advanced all the way to Berlin and seized it, ensuring that every sacrifice and friend lost was repaid in blood.